Hey, welcome to the Gashouse Gang on a snowy day here in St. Louis. Tom Ackerman, Bernie Miklasz, Matt Pauley, Kevin Wheeler. We are ready to burn the hot stove for you and do other topics as well. But as always, we're talking Cardinals. How are you, fellas? Good to talk to you. Good to see you.
All good.
We're up to bring you right out of the gate. I will tell you that some of us do this remotely. I will be doing the next 3 remotely, doing some college basketball this week. And then exciting to tell you that next week we will bring you winter meetings right here on the Gashouse Gang as our very own Matt Pauley right up there in the upper right corner on your screen. We'll be heading to Dallas to cover the meetings with Mike Claiborne, Ricky Horton, and our Cardinals crew. So we're fired up about that. So, Matt, let me start with you as you head into that. You start to prepare here with a week away. What are your thoughts? What do you think the Cardinals' priorities are here?
Yeah, I'm most curious to see if maybe they do find a way to get Nolan Arenado to kind of jump the line and they get a deal done involving him. I've said all along that it feels like in the pecking order of third baseman that there's a lot of other situations that got to get figured out with Bregman and Adames and Devers and guys. Bohm is somebody else who might be available. It's always felt like Arenado's down that list, but you're reading some of the things that are being reported out there that there's some conversations that have started, and the fact that Arenado is willing to play first base, which I think is kind of silly when we think about it. Maybe they do work out a deal. I'm the other guy that I think might get traded early is Steven Matz. I think we're gonna have to wait for a while on Ryan Helsley. The more I think about it, the more I think that maybe they're not going to be able to move Miles Miklasz. So maybe Steven Matz is the other guy that gets moved at the meeting. So those are the 2 names for the Cardinals that I'm most intrigued by, specifically during the winter meetings. If they can work a deal for Arenado, if they can work a deal for Matz.
Wheels, how did that start, the Arenado to first base? I read it in Katie Woo's piece, and that was the first I had heard of that.
I don't know, but it's the dumbest thing ever because his most value is at third base defense, right? I mean, like, okay, I'm willing to go play a position where my bat doesn't play. I mean, okay. It sounded like they're trying to get the Padres in, right? It sounds like you're trying because they have Machado. Machado's not moving off third base, and maybe you're hoping that you can convince somebody to make a move like that. Look, it's never terrible, but like the best thing about Nolan Arenado is his third base defense. I'm not sure why you'd want to move. In fact, I think if you look at the teams that could have interest in him, it's going to be teams that need a defensive upgrade at third base, right? If Boston decides to move Devers to first base and they want to get some better defense at third, that would make sense. And a lot of that has to do with what are they going to do with Tristan Casas? Do they have to trade him to get Garrett Crochet? Or is he a DH? I mean, they have a lot of ways they can go, but unless they're making that move, if they do, it would be to get defense. If Houston loses Bregman and you want a veteran third baseman that can hit home runs in the short left field porch, great. I don't see the draw of acquiring Arenado and playing him at first base. If I'm an opposing team, I don't have any interest in that.
Well, one thing is clear, Bernie, is that going into the winter meetings, the days of the Cardinals being in the conversation for David Price and Juan Soto and Bryce Harper and Giancarlo Stanton or whoever else, those days are over. I mean, for now. This is about strengthening the team for the future.
Yeah, those days passed way back. I mean, you think about it, it's been forever since the Cardinals have been seriously, even borderline seriously involved in speculation for the top free agents in terms of the cost. And that's why one of the many reasons Chaim Bloom is coming in, because they have to have a more efficient payroll because they're not going to be playing at that top of the market. They're just not. But as far as what's going to happen with Arenado, it's kind of wait it out and see. I think I agree with Kevin Wheeler, and I wrote about it. I actually did something about just showing how much of his overall value these days in his career is based on defense rather than offense. So if you move him off third base, he loses a lot of his value. Not to repeat what Kevin said, but just to kind of add some things to it. That said, if we want to play the air, where is Arenado going to go game? If we want to play that game, because I don't know, it's 70 million media people are playing it every day. We might as well join the crowd. There's a fit with the Yankees because number one, the Yankees are, loaded. They can move Jazz Chisholm to second base because they're losing Gleyber Torres as a free agent. Chisholm can go to second. Arenado plugs in at third. And then in theory, depending on what they do at first base, because they did not make a tender offer to Anthony Rizzo, and he's not very good anymore. In theory, you could also put him at first base some, or, he could play both. I don't know. But that would be a potential fit. I think Houston would be a potential fit, and they might have a need for him at first base, even if they sign Bregman. Other than that, the Dodgers are the usual suspect, and Nolan Arenado did a playful thing over the weekend by putting something on his Instagram account with basically family photos of his off season and the holiday time of the year. They're out at amusement parks. They're here. There's a beach. There's there. Just a collection of photos, lovely photos. But what he did was he added a soundtrack, which happens to be off of Kendrick Lamar's new hit, who's not critically acclaimed album. And the song is Dodger Blue. It's the 8th track on the album, Dodger Blue. So the way the social media works nowadays, if someone as prominent as Nolan Arenado just puts a song Dodger Blue over top the photos at a time where his name's in all kinds of trade speculation, let's just say the predictions were or the comments were predictable, ranging from go to LA. We don't want you here anymore anyway. Get out of here now. I'm sorry you were ever a Cardinal. Ranging from that to, oh, you poor baby. Our hearts are with you. You have all of our support because the Cardinals did you wrong. And John Mozeliak treated you dishonorably. And if I were you, I'd want to get away from here too. So it's either half the people, the Cardinals fans, basically, wanted him imprisoned. I don't know what the prison is out in LA, but they want to send him to prison in LA, not the Dodgers, but prison. Then the other half used it as yet another opportunity to take baseball bats and sledgehammers and pound John Mozeliak.
Can I ask you something? Let me jump in here before we go into any more baseball talk. Bernie,
that's what the kids are buzzing about, Tom.
What happened to Cardinals? Remember back when the Cardinals fans were so friendly and everybody was like, boy, Cardinals fans, they bake cookies for their players. They love their players. What a great baseball town that is. When did we become this vicious? I'll tell you when it was. When the Cubs got good, that's how I feel. Things started to turn. 2015, when the Cubs beat the Cardinals in the playoffs, and then the next year they win the World Championship, Cardinals fans went I love this, Bernie, to vicious. That's where it turned.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also, there's that part of it, but there's also just a general societal thing. Social media, is given a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year platform to people to air their grievances. Even if they really have no grievances, they'll make some just to fit the crowd. And just everyone's got to air their grievances, and everyone's a victim of something. I was once talking to Whitey Herzog about this, and Whitey Herzog, and this was back before really Twitter or anything else, but we were talking about message boards, forums. People would go in and chat. And I hosted such a place. In fact, Dave Duncan famously went on there to battle fans. I couldn't believe it. I had to have the people at the Post-Dispatch check all the information to make sure it was actually him. And he talked about why he did it. But he would go in there and duke it out with Cardinals fans. And I'm like, wow. So this thing is going into a whole new realm, and it has. But I asked Whitey Herzog about that, and I said, Whitey, if you were still managing, you would be getting ripped constantly, even though you're one of the great managers ever. You do realize that these managers now, none of them have a chance because they're just going to get shredded around the clock if they make one decision in a game the night before that doesn't work out, even if it was the right decision. And I think Tony La Russa was an example of that too, because he acknowledged what a distraction social media had become, and it was starting to become more and more and more. So I just think people just have a forum to kind of show off, get the attention of other people, create attention for themselves by just ripping everything and everybody. And so I'm not surprised. I mean, I was looking, towards the end of his career, Stan Musial, like in 1959, by his standards, had a bad year. Had Twitter or X or whatever existed then, at least a percentage of Cardinals fans would have been bludgeoning Stan Musial. I mean, in other words, there are no boundaries. There's no common sense. Everything is in play. There's no such thing as like, well, Stan the man, that's kind of off limits. No, nothing is off limits. So I wanted to get that off my chest too.
Yeah, I would throw in the fact too that you got a whole generation of fans that didn't know what mediocre baseball was.
Right.
I mean, right? If you're 35 or younger, you barely remember the last time before the MV3 years, right? You're probably 10 the last time the team was mediocre, or it's 8 or whatever. Your entire adult life has been this team winning the division, being the bully in the division, beating the Cubs, beating the Reds, beating the Pirates, making playoff runs. I mean, like, I think that plays into it too. It's that's the expectation for people. If you're 35 or under, that's all you know. And that's not even counting, Bernie and guys, all of the people that are older than that fall into the category you just described. When you combine those things, you get to this point.
Matt, what you witnessed it from the Brewers side. I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of baseball. I always make the joke that when I did 6.5 years of Brewers post game, and from the moment I walked in to the moment I left, people were calling for Craig Counsell to be fired. And you got to think about this in terms of what he was doing as the Brewers manager, not how he's felt about now in Milwaukee after leaving to go to Chicago. We can all agree that Counsell did a pretty solid job with Milwaukee, and I talked to people every single night that thought he was not equipped to be the manager there. So I think sports fans, baseball fans are largely the same across the board. I think to Bernie's point, and look, we live in a country right now where we've kind of become mean, and social media has allowed us to be anonymous and say anything about anybody at any moment in time. And at one, it was social media driven before, but I think it's kind of escalated to a point where now people are more willing to even put their name behind it. There's some civility that has been lost in our country, and I think it definitely permeates into sports fans as well, to every fan base. I don't think this is at all specific about the Cardinals fan base.
It is the Gashouse Gang on KMOX and all of our social media channels. It's sponsored by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer. Bernie Miklasz, tell us about our great sponsor.
It would be my pleasure. We love Saliga Heating and Cooling. They've been taking care of us for about 16 years now. Dan Saliga is the 4th generation owner or operator of this proud family business that has set the highest standard, which is why they're still going strong after opening way back when in 1927. I mean, think about that. They opened the same year the 1927 Yankees with Garrigan Ruth dominating baseball. That's how long they've been around, but they're as great as ever. And they are an independent American Standard and heating dealer. They have that great American standard heating and air conditioning equipment for you, but sometimes you don't need all new equipment. Saliga Heating and Cooling, we have found, is 100% honest and have great integrity. They don't try to hustle or talk you into something you really don't need. They're just trying to make a sale. They do not do that. They're on the level, and you can trust them. And they do all residential work or commercial work, all makes or models. And there's so many other things I want to tell you about, and I don't have the time right at this moment. But you should go to SaligaHeatingandCooling.com and find out about the Priority Club maintenance program that works. We're members of that. It's really, really good. And also free quotes you can get by going online or calling. Financing options are available subject to credit approval. So to get the phone number or just to find out more about Saliga Heating and Cooling, go to SaligaHeatingandCooling.com.
With Bernie Miklasz, Matt Pauley, Kevin Wheeler, I'm Tom Ackerman. Wheels, we had some news break the last 24 hours, really. Matthew Boyd, 2 years, $29 million with the Cubs to join their rotation. Frankie Montas with the Mets, 2 years, $34 million. So he gets 5 more total than Boyd did. How does this affect the pitching market and specifically the St. Louis Cardinals?
Well, that's what I thought would be fun for us to kick around, right? I mean, Matthew Boyd has barely pitched for 3 years. Now, he looked great at the end of last year. He was amazing in the postseason, but it was 3 starts. He got paid that amount of money essentially because of what he looked like for a month last season. I mean, if you look at his recent track record, and again, he's fine. Like when he pitches, he's been generally okay, but he made 8 starts this year. He made 15 starts the year before that. He made 0 starts in 2022. He did make 10 appearances, but like he's been hurt now for 3-4 years. And all it took was a month of really good baseball to get 2 years and $29 million. And I think it tells us a couple things, and that's what I wanted to bring you guys in on this, because we mentioned Steven Matz earlier, and we know the Cardinals are in the process of trying to clear up rotation space. If you can move Matz, if you can get Miklasz to agree to move and find something, does this stuff tell you guys anything about whether or not there may be value in those players? Because I look at Boyd and I'm like, okay, I mean, he's good, but it's been a long time since he's been healthy and good, and he's 33. And Frankie Montas is only 31, and he had a 4.8 ERA last year, 4.7 expected ERA. But what Montas has is a really good fastball in the mid to upper 90s and a splitter that none of these other guys have. So I can see the bet on his stuff playing because he's got one pitch that's different and he throws hard. I'm not sure that Boyd, given his age and his track record, is any better than Steven Matz as far as what anybody would want. But at the same time, you didn't have to give up anything to get Boyd. You just had to sign a contract.
Yeah, well, Bernie, the thing about Boyd is he did come back from Tommy John successfully, and he made 3 postseason starts for Cleveland. So this is a little bit of recency bias, I guess you could say, on the case of the Cubs, right, Bernie?
Absolutely. I think they have a pretty smart front office when it comes to evaluating stuff like this. I mean, Jamison Taillon was someone that actually I think has paid off pretty well given the investment that they put in him, because you got to understand the cost of pitching is high, even for guys that come with some risk. So the way I look at it is that every time somebody in this category, Boyd and Montas, come off the market, that just means there's other teams looking for pitching. So therefore, when you see a market price established just in terms of salary, a Steven Matz would align perfectly. Really, he'd be actually a cheaper alternative than Boyd or Montas. And there's a real parallel with Matz and Boyd. I mean, they're about the same age. They both have an injury history. There's a legitimate question about, well, can we get 25 starts out of them? There's a lot. There are some similarities. So I would use Boyd as a model, if you will. A little surprised that he got 2 years. Montas, I'm not sure, because he didn't even pitch well last year. I'm not sure. And Miles Michaelis, I've said this before, say it again. It's, first of all, he's got the no trade clause, but the other thing is, so he can shoot down anything he doesn't like. But it's only 1 year left, and people laugh every time I say this because they don't understand the context of what we're all saying about this. Miles Michaelis has value to a really good team that's got a really good rotation, but they just need more innings at the back end, because he can give you 30 plus starts and he can give you 200 innings. And there's not a lot of guys who can do that. He will give you some really good starts along the way. I mean, Miles Michaelis, go take a look at how many quality starts he had last year. I'm not saying he was a good pitcher where he had a good season. His ERA was over 5. But along the way, you can count on a lot of innings. You can count him to take the ball every time he's supposed to. And maybe about half the time, he's going to pitch really, really well. So if you're a team that's got a really good rotation, there's room there if you're worried about innings. And we need an innings guy. An innings guy. So there could be a market for him. That's all I'm saying. More than people would imagine.
What do you
Matt,
guys? I was going to throw this at you, Tom and Matt. Do you guys think the Cardinals would just give them away? Because that's kind of the point, right? Like, you can go sign Kyle Gibson and not have to give anything up. You can go sign a Matthew Boyd for 2 years, but you don't have to trade any players. Do you guys think that, even though Matz is cheaper, even though Miklasz is just 1 year, do you think there's value in just spending money and not giving up players? And do you guys think the Cardinals have the stomach to just give up the contracts and not get anything in return?
I'll throw this to Matt, and I'll add Eric Fetty's name in there. In that, Fetty, I think, has some value, but I think he has more value, Matt, at the deadline. I think at the trade deadline, I'm assuming the Cardinals aren't in it. Same thing, why the Cardinals went and got him. He was one of the best guys available out there. I think he would have some pretty big value for them at the deadline. What do you think there?
I think Fetty's value is growing every single time one of these contracts is signed.
Yeah, $7.5 million.
Right. So he's a really affordable contract. If there's some teams that are sitting on the outside looking in this offseason because they couldn't afford $34 million for Frankie Montas, they just didn't think that was going to be the sandbox that Major League Baseball was playing in this year. If we run into one of those situations, I absolutely think that somebody could swoop in and give the Cardinals a pretty solid deal for Fetty, where they actually get more for Fetty this offseason, or maybe at the deadline, to your point, Tom, than what they gave up for him in Tommy Edman at the last deadline. So the Eric Fetty thing, I think, is really interesting, the way this whole thing plays out. As far as giving up Matz or Miklasz, if you can get out from under those contracts, you do it. You don't have to get a whole lot back for those guys. Kyle Gibson's name was mentioned. I think if there was a scenario where they traded both a Matz and a Miklasz, I could see them bringing back Gibson, get kind of the same for him, what you were maybe going to get out of one of those guys. You still open up a spot in the rotation for a younger player. That just creates more flexibility. I don't think Miles Miklasz is getting traded. I agree with everything that Bernie said, but I continue to sit here and think that Miles Miklasz is really comfortable with the Cardinals. He likes sleeping in his own bed during spring training. He got the no trade clause for a reason. Unless it's a very specific, perfect type situation, I don't think Miles Miklasz is going to accept a trade. So we might be talking about stuff here that just probably isn't likely to happen. But Matt's, especially compared to the Boyd contract, that looks solid. If you can just get out from under that contract or most of that contract, you do it, and you wait to see if all of a sudden you can get some really good pieces for Eric Fetty.
I think we all would do it, right? But do just a poll of the room. Do you guys think the Cardinals would do it that way? Do you think they're like, well, just take the money, we don't need anything? Because I don't feel like that's how they move, even though I agree that's what they should do.
Well, they gave Dexter Fowler away.
Yeah.
Just to get rid of a bad contract and open up time for younger outfielders.
Good point.
And there was another example of that too, but I think Fowler is the most recent example. I think they picked up everything except $1 million of what he was owed, and he was owed quite a bit for that final year. And he I don't think he even played for the Angels except for a little bit. So they've done it, but so I don't know. See, and this is where, listen, we're all in limbo, so to speak, because I see a lot of times, like in the videos I do on YouTube, gratuitous plug, the Bernie show on YouTube, but it's for a reason. One of the things that fascinates me about this, and this will come across as me being critical of fans, and I'm not. I'm just saying I'm fascinated by it. We're stuck in the middle because it's one more year of John Mozeliak, and then Chaim Bloom takes over, but people aren't entirely sure what to expect with Chaim Bloom, and I get it. Yeah, until he actually starts to do the job, they don't know. And yet, people talk about, well, the Cardinals ought to do this, and they ought to do that. They ought to do this. They ought to do that, and they're thinking about it without realizing, well, John Mozeliak is the guy making those decisions, and do you really want him spending money in his final year? I would rather him just not spend money this year and then just turn those kind of decisions over to Chaim Bloom. And we're in a gray area because we're in between presidents of baseball operations. We're in between them. And the other thing is we don't know exactly. We know that like last offseason as a consultant, Chaim Bloom gave the Cardinals some really good advice about the relief pitching market. But we don't know exactly how much input that Chaim Bloom will have on any of these decisions made technically in John Mozeliak's final year, where Chaim Bloom is not. He's doing player development in the minor leagues for a year. So we don't know how to evaluate whether. I don't know. Let me speak for myself. I do not know how to evaluate what the Cardinals would be willing to do, because I don't know who exactly is calling the shots like 100%. I don't know if it's two guys. I don't know if it's some new advisors in the background. We don't know who's really making these decisions. Ultimately, it sits on Bill DeWitt's desk, but I think he would go along with just about everything that's not something really major, So I have a hard time trying to discuss these things because the way my brain works, it's like, well, tell me who's making the decision, and maybe I'll have a good answer about what they might do or we should expect them not to do.
It's the Gashouse Gang on KMOX. Bernie Miklasz, Matt Pauley, Kevin Wheeler. Bernie, let's continue that thought about where this team is going. And let me just comment on something that you just said about, leadership hierarchy. So it does all go through Bill DeWitt, but it's basically it goes to John Mozeliak, and then he takes it to Bill and he says, yes, pretty much to, I think, most of what John Mozeliak presents him. But I do think that Chaim Bloom has very heavy influence right now in the background. Lots of conversations going on as he eventually will take over. Everything does have to go through him, so he's knowledgeable about what's happening here. My question to you is, Bernie, is how long is this going to take? I mean, this reset, I know they don't like to use the word rebuild, but it is. They are rebuilding the franchise. This reset, this plan that they're putting together, how long is it?
A lot of it depends on the success level of individuals in 2025. I did something the other day about this where it's like, what happens if 2025, we know what their plan is, or at least their stated plan is. What if it doesn't go as well as expected? What if it is kind of a mini disaster? Then what do you do? You're like, well, wait a minute. This isn't a reset. Obviously, with players A, B, C, and D not coming close to what we were hoping to see this year, we have to reevaluate their future. We have to reevaluate what our direction should be. And, oh, by the way, Chaim Bloom at that point will be taken over. So a lot of that has to do with the individual case-by-case basis of all these players that they're going to, quote, give an opportunity to. But if it doesn't go well, then I think everything's on the table for after 2025. I'm not talking about a complete teardown, but the Cardinals have a lot of good talent at AA and even AAA. They do have young talent even on the big league club. They got talent on the way. So they could go into a more deeper rebuild, which would not be a teardown, and just like really plug in youth and then get away from having to make these decisions where you're like, well, I guess we got to keep Miklasz, and therefore, like in theory, a younger pitcher doesn't get an opportunity. You go with a clean slate after 2025, and if you need a fuller rebuild, you're just going to have to be straight with the fans if it gets to that, and just say, no, we're seeing a fuller rebuild now, but we like the young talent we have, and we don't think we're going to be in baseball hell for very long. So, just a thought there.
Yeah. On that, I think so much of this is dependent upon Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker. If the season gets started and those guys don't look better than how they looked this past year, then you're walking into a scenario where Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar and whoever else could potentially get moved in season at the deadline, and it becomes more of a longer-term plan. But if Walker and Gorman take big steps forward and you're competitive, I think you feel much more comfortable about where you are going to be. If that happens, you're probably kind of where you were at this past year. Maybe you're a postseason team. Maybe you're not. You're kind of contending. You're sticking around 500. To me, that's the ceiling for this team. But if that doesn't happen and it looks more like 2 years ago, you're going to trade away some core pieces. You're probably going to make a managerial change at the end of the year. Like all of a sudden, it really does look like Chaim Bloom starts kind of from scratch outside of a Mason Wynn and JJ Weatherholt and some of the guys behind the plate and things like that. But I hate to put all of that on two guys, but I really think the fortunes of this team moving forward are largely dictated by if Gorman and Walker can be middle of the order run producers.
Yeah, fair enough. Kevin?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, 100%. Because if you don't have those, who hits in the middle of your order in 2 years?
Yeah,
I mean, that's where you are. You need those guys, and if you don't have them now, what do you have to do? You got to go pay for them or trade for them. Well, what are you trading? Are you going to get in the sweepstakes for these $400 and $500 million contracts? Because
no.
We can all talk about that, and fans can be excited about it, but the team's got to be willing. And Bernie,
no.
like we're all in the same spot. That's not happening.
I know, and people get mad at me for saying it, but we can pretty much go by history, can't we? If we know which way this is going. That's why Bloom's been hired, because he, DeWitt wants to have what he had in Jeff Luhnow, and I've reviewed this a million times, so I'm not going to go through it again. Payroll efficiency is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't know why people object to that. Well, it's just him being cheap. No, it's not. It's being smart. It's spending your money wisely is what that means. And also using some of the stuff that Luno brought to the operation where you're drafting better too. You're getting gems in the later rounds because the way Luno and his analysts, some of whom are running major league franchises now, they had a way to use an analytics to identify a talent trait that told them this guy's worth taking a shot on in the 8th round because of this and this and this, because they had data that people didn't. The rest of baseball was not familiar with. So a lot of it has to do with, the reason Chaim Bloom's coming in here, and it's not going to be to pursue the big free agents. It's to make sure that really good talent's on the way to the major leagues, and it continues to come to the major leagues. And it's a self-sustaining thing in terms of success. And then you do supplement it with some big moves. That's exactly what the Cardinals did all those years that they were the model baseball operation. So it's tough. It's tough. I think it's a critically important year for Lars Nootbaar because he's not a kid. He's one of these guys that gets lumped into the kid category. Why is he a kid? He's not a kid. He's not 36 years old, but he's not a kid, and at some point he's got to get to the starting gate enough, So I don't know. It's a kind of a hazy year. And the other thing too, if they trade Helsley and Kittredge, who's as good as gone, if Kittredge isn't coming back as a free agent, I've said this before, but the Cardinals might actually be showing a lot of progress. Maybe Walker's doing better, Gorman's doing better, Nootbaar's playing more right on down the line. But if your bullpen's blowing late leads all the time and victories are turned into losses, which was the exact opposite this past season, in terms of selling it to the fans, you may have actually come a long way in finding out good things about your young players. But if you're spitting up 1-run leads all the time in the 8th and 9th inning, people are just going to look at the record. Well, wait a minute, you lost close to 90 games again. Why should we be happy with this? You should have done better than that. Walker had a good year. Gorman had a good year. That guy had a good year. If your bullpen falls apart, it doesn't matter what they did because you're just going to give away a lot of games. So they could be in a PR, what's the word? A bind, a little bit of a PR crisis.
Yeah.
And that's why their determination with Ryan Helsley is really important because it can affect how the team's perceived, even if a lot of things are going well next year, but they don't have that closer to put games away.
Well, there's no doubt about it that there is a segment of the fan base that does not know all the ins and outs, So when Nolan Arenado gets traded, they're going to be like, "What? Huh? Oh, what are we doing?" So
those are the cookie bakers and the sweater knitters, right?
And that's totally fine. They're not into it on a daily basis. They got lives, they got things going on. Chris is not one of those though. Can you pop up Chris's comment about Nolan Gorman if we can?
Yeah, that's my guy, Chris. So he comments a lot on my YouTube channel. He's
Gorman,
good.
Walker was the 21st pick in the draft. Gorman was the 19th overall pick in the draft. This is a high school player who was highly regarded, and we want to see what is the best of Nolan Gorman. I think we talk a lot about his offense. I'll throw this to you, Kevin, before we switch topics. This will be our final thing on baseball, but the baseball savant ranking of Gorman pretty high. He said 14th percentile in arm strength, 9th percentile in range is not very high.
No.
Your thoughts on those things, because his defense gets a lot of love what he did at second base.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the love is just people here talking. It's not I don't see any of the metrics saying that he's a good second baseman. He's passable when he hits. Right? When you look at the last 2 or 3 years, his defensive run value has been well below average in each of the last 3 years. He was in the bottom 20% this year, as an example. And that's part of why, even though the arm strength doesn't rate great, why I would be okay with the move to third, being it's a more natural position for him. And he's got more experience there. He's played there his whole life. And Donovan would actually be a plus second baseman. I mean, we've seen him be very good there. So I don't know that Donovan plays as a plus third. Maybe he's an average third. So if I could go plus at second and I'm, average or even below average at third, the entirety of Gorman's value is going to be with the bat. And by the way, I think you guys, again, throw it to you guys, see if you agree. We're also at the point where we shouldn't be forcing it. If he's not showing that he's an asset defensively, then he's a DH. I mean, or he plays first base sometimes. I mean, like at some point, the leash runs out. Now, it's not now. He's 24. We're not talking about now. But if in season you find your best lineup is Nolan Gorman is your DH, well, then you do it, although that kind of puts you in a bind with Burleson. Yeah. So you're going to have to figure out second or third base, one or the other for Gorman.
It does. Let me throw it to Matt Pauley because, like all of us, I think a lot of this hinges on Gorman.
Yeah, and I thought he was fine at second. I don't know what the defensive metrics were for him specifically to say the first 2 months of the year this past season. I thought he looked like he had really improved defensively at second base for the first couple months, and then he kind of reverted back to who he had been previously. But when Kevin says passable, that's the right word. I think he's going to be passable at third. You're going to go from arguably the greatest defensive third baseman in the history of Major League Baseball to Nolan Gorman at third. That's going to be a drop-off, and there's going to be a good number of plays that are not made. But if Gorman can go hit you 30 home runs, that's not going to matter. That's the big question on him. Everything hinges on his offense. The DH question, I think that does present a problem when it comes to having Alec Burleson in the lineup. When they moved Wilson Contreras at first base, they put themselves into a position where Burleson doesn't have a spot outside of being a fill-in outfielder and being the DH. So that puts pressure on Gorman to be able to play a defensive position on an everyday basis if his bat prompts you to need to do that.
Listen, Gorman, I thought held his own at first playing second base. I think it was fair to grade him on a curve. It was a new position for him. And I thought really in that context, he did fine. I thought that his offensive woes affected his defense last year, and he got progressively worse, and he was not good at all. But here's the thing we got to remember about Gorman, and it's just a quick stat. I'm not going nuts here. His first two seasons, 22 and 23, he had a .454 slugging percentage. And if you prorate his home run total over 160 games, 32 home runs a season. Slugged .454, a lot of doubles. He was about 12% above league average overall. If he can repeat that season next year, if he can get back to that season, maybe a little better, that's a guy that you won't really care where he plays in the field or whether he's slightly below average as compared to somebody who's above average. It's all about, like you said, man, it's all about the bat. It's all about the bat. He's got to get back to where he was 22, but especially 2023. And if he doesn't, what is his value? I mean, for a big man, he's actually a good base stealer and a good base runner. If he doesn't have the bat, he's not going to be a defensive standout anywhere.
Right.
So what's the point? It's all dependent on the bat coming back and this new batting coach getting him to think about a better plate approach, which I think is one Brant Brown's entire thing. Most of his foundation of this teaching is plate approach, strike zone discipline, getting your pitch, not the pitcher's pitch. Have a plan every time you go up. I think a guy like that can give Gorman and Walker what they need to be smarter, but at some point it's up to them.
The Gashouse gang at KMOX, we are out of time. We went all baseball, as we always do on these Mondays.
All right.
Kevin Wheeler and I are going to get into college football tomorrow as we figure out who's in this college football playoff latest.
Get Miami out of here. Get them out.
I wouldn't put them in.
I'm feeling
I'm
pretty
a fan.
good.
I wouldn't put them in, man. You had your chances against a weak schedule. Indiana's in. You're good, Tom.
Yeah, we're good.
You're good.
Bernie, before we go, tell us about Saliga Heating and Cooling.
They're the best. We love them. We've been calling them for 15, 16 years. Generations of St. Louis families have been getting in touch with Saliga. We need some help. Saliga Heating and Cooling all the way back to 1927. And it's an independent American standard heating and air conditioning dealer that has just set the highest of standards for their integrity, their professionalism, their knowledge, the class they show when they come into your home. They have found cheaper solutions for us. They're not trying to give you, okay, what can we sell these people? They're the exact opposite of that. That's why I say their trustworthiness is the highest grade you can give them. There's financing options available, subject to credit approval. They have a maintenance program with the Saliga Heating and Cooling, American Heating and Air Conditioning dealer. The Priority Club is a great maintenance program. Get some information on that when you go to SaligaHeatingCooling.com, SaligaHeatingCooling.com. You'll get the phone number there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Subscribe to the Bernie Show at YouTube. Bernie Miklasz has an outstanding show. You can subscribe to KMOX Sports while you're there. You can get this and other great topics. Kevin Wheeler's on the DGS. And after him will be Matt Pauley with Sports Open Line. Before we go, what you got tonight, Matt?
Well, just got 45 minutes leading into SLU basketball. We'll look back. We'll do a lot of college football and NFL football today. But, man, college football is crazy going into championship week. And there's a lot of teams there.
What about a brawl on the Gashouse game?
Yeah.
What a weird – I know it was rivalry weekend, but what a weird thing where there were so many fights.
Let's just say none of them will be up for the Musial Awards. And
That's right. Everything's become social media now, battleground.
Yeah. Right? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
For Bernie, for Kevin, for Matt, I'm Tom Ackerman. Thank you for joining us on the Gashouse Gang.